I don't actually remember my first time at St. Luke's. I was a little baby growing into a toddler. My first memories of St. Luke's start to take shape in the nursery and the Sunday school rooms. Remembering the long walk up to the altar for communion, past the choir of men and boys. The thrill of playing in the Ark in Genesis Land playground after church. There's the sound of Father Young's lessons during hot summers in confirmation classes, Mr. Custer training us as acolytes, and the sheer joy of a little girl that I got to take Eucharist from a woman, Mother Beryl, for the first time, and my mom teaching Sunday school. My own child level of racial understanding and development at the time recognized that there were few other Black people, but it seemed that people were nice and liked us and were good to us. And I fell in love with the quiet contemplation that I experienced at St. Luke's and with the connection to God that I felt was nurtured in this community. However, St. Luke's was different than home, not in how God was present, but in how my full self was reflected and felt celebrated and loved by God. At home, I had an assortment of Black dolls and Bible stories with realistic people of color in the books, unlike St. Luke's nursery. And it was definitely different at my grandparents' Baptist church, just a few blocks away, also in downtown Long Beach, where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King actually peered back at you from all of the handheld fans in the pews. With family, I regularly heard and sang African American songs of praise. I would go to choir practice on Wednesday nights and sing with my grandmother at her church. And in my child mind, I truly wondered how the choir at St. Luke's could be so famous without a single Black woman in it, especially as some of my family members went on to become professional gospel singers. Despite those missing pieces, St. Luke's always felt like home in some way. And I guess in my understanding back then, I knew it was the same God. It was just different, kind of like two different worlds almost. And if you haven't experienced that feeling, this is how othering works. Always straddling different worlds, code switching, and expending energy needing to always know about the dominant culture when they know little or nothing about yours. Using a type of energy that my white friends didn't understand. A feeling of being in places that seemed to have erased your existence, but still say you're included. From my work in supporting people and organizations through their process of transformation and growth, I know that one of the most toxic things that we can believe is something like, this is how we've always done it, leaning comfortably into tradition and the status quo. For many decades, I would have to say that if St. Luke's had a slogan made up of some combination of Episcopal stubbornness and good old entitlement, it would be, this is how we've always done it at St. Luke's. And I say that with full awareness and accountability for using that phrase at times myself. Transition's a difficult process, and we can feel lost and even out of control in response to change. And I know that this can be especially hard in a community like those of us at St. Luke's that prides itself on being open and welcoming. And actually that self-assessment is true up to a point. Unlike most of my friends who parted with any religious affiliation as a teen, and those who were leaving in droves, leaving their congregations over all kinds of things, abuse and the misogyny and the homophobia, I felt lucky and safe at St. Luke's. We had become more inclusive, not perfect, but better. And so I continued to acolyte into college, driving home on the weekends. And then I became the first young Black woman verger during college, something that was considered a first, right? As I became more involved with multiple ministries into my adulthood, leadership over the years, I eventually served as on the vestry and as senior warden. And the old refrain of, "This is the way we've always done it," took on other shapes. I don't actually remember the first time someone made it obvious that St. Luke's was conditionally welcoming, as in, we welcome you, but only if you don't try to change things too much. But there are painful memories, heated discussions, wanting to disallow or limit non-Episcopal music, referring to anything that wasn't European, people's shock or surprise at the intelligence or musical ability of Black guest speakers and musicians that we brought in for Black History Month, and even overt disgust at hearing Spanish spoken on our grounds. When a committee was writing our current mission statement back in the early 2000s about being an inclusive and multicultural church pursuing transformation, I showed up to that day-long mission writing retreat armed with keywords, brownies, and resolve. I knew that the St. Luke's that had cultivated my deep connection to Christ and that taught me to see Christ in the most vulnerable had to be pushed forward if this was to be the community I believed it could be. And sadly, writing that mission was an uphill battle just to land on the phrasing we have. And I don't believe that without the pressure of a couple white men in power, including our former beloved rector, that we would have overcome the opposition to stating it in such a clear way. What does acting as an inclusive, multicultural community that is transforming, what does that mean to us now, years later in 2020? Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd were brutally murdered, or we found out about their murders right around my birthday this year, during this pandemic. Facing many struggles of keeping our two small businesses afloat, praying that family and friends would keep safe, I asked myself, how am I going to ever have the strength to bear this ongoing suffering of anti-Blackness, of death, of dehumanization? How will I have any capacity to witness the suffering of my family, of my community, and even to keep doing my job to try to create healing with my clients, most of whom are Black or Indigenous, folks of color, who are queer or trans people of color? That Sunday, we showed up on Zoom for service, and it felt like I could leave a little bit of that pain with God. And in this season of deconstructing racism in our distance services, I have felt more at home at St. Luke's than ever before. We have embarked on a path together that looks and sounds far more like my lived experience, far more like that of my mom's, my partners, and the rest of my family. I have longed to hug and connect with my beloved community, but especially I have thought of all of my Black and brown church family. I have wondered about you and prayed for you during this time, wondering how those of us, Black, Native, Latinx, Asian, other folks of color, how do we stretch ourselves once again to both rejoice in the work that is being done to dismantle white supremacy, even with new learning opportunities like my work to do, but simultaneously, we must endure having our reality and lived experiences discussed by others. I can only speak for myself, although many others have shared with me that it is exhausting. How many times will we need to break chains of silence and oppression to have our pain carefully or politely or continuously displayed for it to be enough? I do remember that in times of stress, I have felt relief in the community at St. Luke's. I have been thankful for it so many times across my life. And in this season, I am blessed to be in community with all of you. I also know that becoming beloved community takes more than crafting words and changing images. I ask this community to stop looking at structural racism as something that you learn about Black people or other marginalized communities. Prayerfully enter into this as an active participant and know that though you may be tired or annoyed or shocked or even feel guilty, that we are exhausted, we are traumatized, and some of us are dead from the acts of racist collusion with systems of oppression. Now, let me share, it is not sad, it is not traumatizing to be Black. It is traumatizing to experience racism and other forms of oppression. Black, Indigenous, Latinx, queer, other folks of color, disabled folks, immigrant communities, poor, neurodiverse people, people without homes. We live our lives often having to see through someone else's lens, through echoes of your memories, your music, and even your faces, where God should be. What will your part be in this critical time? Support means seeing the systems as the problem, not the people who have suffered under those systems. Reconciliation and becoming beloved community means atoning for the harm and being committed to continue that work moving forward, centering those made most vulnerable. I hope and I pray that St. Luke's will continue to grow and transform in order to be the beloved community I have always believed it could be.